Hi everybody, today we're going to be covering section 5.1, which is tragedy of the commons. The learning objective for today is that you can explain the concept of tragedy of the commons, and the essential knowledge that you're going to gain is essentially like what tragedy of the commons is. The suggested skill that you'll be practicing is explaining environmental concepts and processes. So we're going to start with what is tragedy of the commons. And this is going to be where individuals will use shared or public resources in their own self-interest, essentially degrading them. Now, an important part of this, the little stars tell you, is that this has to be a public resource, not privately owned. If it's like a private individual owner and people come in and use it up, it's not considered tragedy of the commons because it's not going to be a commons. And it also needs to be degraded, overused, depleted, used up in some way to count as an example of tragedy of the commons. So some examples that we're going to have, overgrazing, where you're going to have farmers just using up all the public rangeland and all the grass is eaten by their animals. Overfishing, where you're just going to have different fishing companies or individuals going into the ocean and just taking way too many fish out. Water and air pollution, when stuff is just going to be released into the water or the air and it's not really being monitored, it's going to lead to a buildup of the toxins in that water or air. And then overuse of groundwater. You are going to have either individuals or corporations like Nestle coming in and using up all the water because fresh water is just a public resource. Nobody owns it. And so they're going to be able to use that up for their own gain. Sorry, that didn't cooperate. Okay, so why does tragedy of the commons happen? The first part is when nobody owns the resource, the land, the water, the air, no one's going to directly suffer the negative consequences of depleting, degrading, or overusing it. It's not like you are using up your own personal land. It's just going to be, all right, we'll move on to another problem. I don't own that. I'll go to a different place, and it's not going to be my problem. Also, people are going to assume that others will overuse the resource if they won't. A lot of times it can be just, I've got to survive on my own. It's going to get used up anyway, so I might as well be able to benefit from it. It can just be like a basic survival thing. Sometimes it's not just totally based on like selfish corporation capitalism. It can literally just be like, I need food to feed my family, and someone's going to get it, so I might as well be able to survive from the resources on my own. So this is just going to be a comic here showing how this is like a commonly known phenomenon. And this says, well, there it is, the last fish in the ocean. And this person says, woohoo, but at least we beat the Russians and the Spaniards to it. Now, another reason that the tragedy of the commons is going to happen is because there's no penalty for overusing, degrading, polluting many public resources. So if there isn't a consequence and you're able to gain from it, why would you not? So here's going to be a prime example right here is just there's some places, this is not allowed in the United States. We have laws against this, but there's many other places that don't. And there are companies that literally will just dump trash right into the water. So what is the ultimate problem of tragedy of the commons? So this is going to be an example here of the Atlantic cod stocks. This population collapsed in the early 90s off of the coast of Newfoundland because there was overfishing. You had fisheries that came in and took basically all of them, almost led the population to total extinction. And so everyone went and fished these Atlantic cod there, and it led to a population crash, which then led those fishers to a loss of income and can lead to starvation if you are what's ultimately depending on this. So it was a problem for the fish, but it was also a problem for the people who were needing that income. Here's another example. All of the different companies that add pollution into the air, especially from like coal power plants. And this can lead to bronchitis, asthma, increased healthcare costs. And so all of them are going to say, well, on our own, we aren't causing the problem, but cumulatively, there is going to be a problem from it. And another example is all the farms that use pesticides. These are going to have runoff, and it's going to contaminate drinking water. So again, individual farms on their own might not be enough to make it toxic levels of pesticides in the water. However, all those farms together is going to run off, and that's going to be a problem for those who need to drink the water. And here's going to be a term that we can kind of incorporate here. And this is going to be a term called externalities. And externalities are going to be negative costs associated with a human action that are not accounted for in the price. They're unintended side effects. And so again, usually if you're not the one like directly causing it or seeing like the dollars and numbers from the consequences, then you're not going to really factor that into your costs. You're just going to factor in like the benefits that you get from it, even if cumulatively way out there, it's going to end up causing problems. It's an externality. You're not really going to be factoring it into your equation when you are deciding what you're going to be doing. And so it usually isn't considered when people are contributing to it. All right, so here's going to be how we solve tragedy of the commons. Part of it is private land ownership. If it is owned by the government or by individuals, then they can kind of monitor it and keep track of it, and it's no longer kind of a public resource that everyone has access to. You can also have fees or taxes for use. It could be, for example, a permit system for grazing and logging, so there's limited amounts. If any of you have ever gone fishing, you know that you are supposed to have a license for it, and there's rules with the license, like how many you can catch, what time you can catch. They try to make sure you aren't doing it during breeding time. And those are going to be some ways that they can monitor the number of people who are going to be fishing these fish in areas. Another one is having taxes, fines, or even criminal charges for polluting shared air, soil, water resources, because then the companies are going to be considering if it's something that they should be doing, because if it's going to lead them to having criminal charges, then you're not going to do it. So some examples of ways that these have been solved: the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Safe Drinking Act all made rules, fines, and criminal charges against corporations for pollution of shared air, soil, water resources. There's like entire agencies that track down and make sure that anyone who illegally dumps things into a waterway, they're going to get fined and they're going to get in trouble for it, and they're going to be responsible for cleaning it up. We will learn more about all three of these acts later in the year, but just kind of barely introducing you to them now. Another one is the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM. This is going to be a government organization here in the United States that manages rangelands in western United States by collecting grazing fees from ranchers, evaluating land, repairing effects of the overgrazing. So they're actually like monitoring and making sure that things are staying in good condition. Now, all of these examples I just gave, these are United States specific laws. There are going to be other laws in other countries, but since we're in the US of A, we're going to be talking about some of those legislations here in the United States. And here's going to be your practice FRQ for 5.1. And again, you're doing the suggested skill of explaining environmental concepts and processes. So, the oceans of the world are often referred to as a commons. Identify one other such commons, besides the ocean of the world, explaining how human activities affect that commons, and propose a solution for managing that commons. So that's going to be your practice FRQ for 5.1. Those were your notes on 5.1 about tragedy of the commons.